Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill, 2 a.m. Eastern Time, Oregon, surviving Boise State. And I think the first takeaway is this Oregon team still has a lot to clean up. And you can see how good this Oregon team can be, but it's just kind of fits and starts. A lot of inconsistency, obviously, turnovers, penalties. Dan Lanning certainly isn't happy about it. Let's get into just an instant reaction in terms of what we saw from this Oregon team. Now, throughout the week, we are going to dive into this football game, talk about where Oregon needs to clean it up. Now, before we get into it, as always, Dill, I'm on Twitter, I'm on the message boards. A lot of Oregon fans feeling a lot of different ways. First and foremost, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section how you're feeling about this Oregon Ducks team. And then if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. The amount of support the Oregon fans continue to show to the boys, it's been amazing. There's a reason we're up at 2 a.m. talking about this program, because we love it, and the support means a lot from you guys. And Dill, without further ado, I'll kind of kick it to you, give you the T-box, big takeaways from this football game.
I mean, the frustrating thing, I think, inherently for this Oregon team is they've now played 2 straight games where the score is way too close, given how much differential in talent there is, how much better I think this Oregon team is than both these teams. And Boise State's obviously a pretty solid team, but I don't think there's any business that Oregon has taking these games so tight. And I think you kind of said it. Down to down, Oregon's playing really, really good, but they are making some brutal mistakes, brutal penalties, brutal turnovers, and teams are really capitalizing on them. And somehow they got to clean that up, because that like if they do that against Ohio State, they do that against some of their top kind of tests, if you will, they're not going to beat these games. So again, that's 2 straight games now. So now it's not just like, I don't think you can simply overlook it, maybe like you did last game. I mean, something's got to change. They can't take these penalties. They can't.
Yeah, and what I'd say is, one, like I love that this Oregon team is showing that they can win in the fourth quarter. Like when it means the most, this Oregon team is showing up and winning football games. That is going to matter at some point during the season. I think that's good. Kind of like you said, it shouldn't be this close again. I got a ton of respect for Boise State. They got one of the best players in all of college football in Ashton Genty. Not taking away anything from that team. It's just Oregon kind of has a standard, and they're clearly not playing to that standard. I want to start with the Oregon offensive line, and I think what's so frustrating, at least for me, is the Oregon fans who've been rocking with the boys the last couple of weeks, or really the last couple of days, know we've talked about this. This Oregon offensive line, from a personnel standpoint, is really damn good. You got 2 tackles that are going to go to the NFL in less than a couple of months. How they play as a unit is not nearly good enough. And I get you are kind of shuffling the deck on the inside of the offensive line. If you're League Terry, who I have a ton of respect for, I think he's an elite offensive line coach, you're locking those 5 players, 5, 6, 7 players, that rotation in the film room all week and saying, hey, we're going to learn how to pick up blitzes, because it's been a disaster the first 2 games of the season.
Because you're seeing the flashes of dominance from that unit from a physical standpoint. I mean,
Yes.
you need to get yards in the middle. They're moving guys off the ball. They're pushing guys around. But I think you're right. Whether it's in the run game, whether it's in the pass game, they are missing assignments. That's leading the penalties. It's leading the sacks. And those are the things that are pushing these scores tighter than they should be. Because at the end of the day, I think you're right. It's too good of a unit to be playing this poorly at time. And not like as like a whole, not as individuals necessarily, but just having those brutal mistakes ahead.
Yeah, you can tell this is an offensive line that's still working on that gel. And we talked about this last week. Look, throughout spring practice and fall camp, they were playing with a certain rotation. That was Poncho at center, Bedford at guard. Now you're kind of flip-flopping, and you can tell that this unit is still kind of trying. And I also think it's worth mentioning, you lose Powers Johnson. He's a guy that you talk about, the leader of the offensive line last year, the guy that's calling out pass protection. Him and Bo Nix were elite at that. I know Dylan Gabriel can do it. He's a 6-year senior, but I think having a young center, you're seeing some of those growing pains. Last thing I want to talk about the offensive line, and more along the play calling. Enough with the outside zone stuff and the stretches. This is when they're holding on like every play. And I look at this Oregon team when they go to inside zone concepts and power concepts, and they're asking this Oregon offensive line to work more vertically as opposed to horizontally. They have a lot more success running the football. And so I would like to see Will Stein lean on that a little bit more, because I don't think there's many defensive lines that can deal with really the sheer physicality that Oregon brings to the table. And I think you got a running back in Jordan James that excels working vertically as a ball carrier. And so to find this running game, I'd like to see them work more vertically down the field. I want to get into the passing game as well. Dylan Gabriel, like on the box score, 18 to 21, 243, 2 touchdowns. Obviously, they pushed the ball down the field vertically a little bit more, and it normally worked out for them, whether it was actually connecting with guys like Evan Stewart or drawing pass interference calls. There's Dylan Gabriel's got to make those 2 throws. One to Trayshawn Holden, one to Evan Stewart. And I think Dylan
And
Gabriel's
that's another thing, frankly, that's a little frustrating because you've seen that from Dylan Gabriel before. I mean, we go back a couple of years, that Kansas State Oklahoma game. I mean, that's not a game Oklahoma should be losing. But again, Dylan Gabriel in huge moments needs to be able to find a way to hit those big plays. And it's something that, again, you see him making them so consistently for the most part. But there is that situation where in big spots, yeah, you don't want to miss those 2 throws back to back because they were both wide open. Wide receivers did their job, and they're not hard throws.
And I disagree with that, because I think on average, like Dylan Gabriel's been pretty dang good at making the throws that are there. I mean, he was 18 to 21. The 2 misses that we're talking about they were bad misses, and it obviously makes you want to pull your hair out. On average in Dylan Gabriel's career, he normally doesn't miss those throws.
That's the thing is on average he definitely doesn't, but that's like a big time fourth quarter throw that they need him to make.
Agreed.
He needs to make that throw. Then excuse me.
And I think he's got to manage the pocket a little bit more. And I don't know if there's like a ton of confidence with the offensive line protection. So I'm not necessarily like 100% blaming him, because the offensive line has not been keeping him upright consistently enough. But you do want to see him settle in, step up into pockets, and deliver some footballs down the field. And I think Will Stein needs to ask Dylan Gabriel to be a Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback. Like, that's what you brought this kid in to do. I feel like we're treating him like a game manager quarterback. Like, there was a reason Dylan Gabriel was the odds-on favorite to start the season to win the Heisman Trophy. Treat him like you treated Bo Nix in 2023, because I think Dylan Gabriel is capable of that, and you certainly have the wide receivers on the outside to make that type of thing happen. A lot, like Dan Lanning said it best in the press conference. Like, once this team gets into a little bit more of a rhythm, you see how explosive they can be. They got to find a rhythm, right? You can't go 2 good plays and then take a sack or take a 10-yard holding penalty. Oregon never did any of that. Bo Nix was the second to least sack quarterback last year. Part of what made this Oregon offense so special last year was they were always on schedule and never taking negative plays.
Well, that's what's making these penalties so frustrating.
Agreed.
It's like, again, you'd see those moments where it really gets rolling for Oregon. They're running the ball. It feels like they're getting 10 yards plus on every play, whether that's a run, whether that's a pass. And then you revert to something like really, really weak from that offensive line. They give you a penalty or do something that throws that momentum off. Because I think you're right. When Oregon's rolling, I mean, the defense was playing really well. The offense was playing really well. And then they'd make that crucial mistake and it'd knock everything off kilter. Those turnovers obviously cost them 14 points. So those alone, I mean, you eliminate those, that game's not really particularly close. So again, I'm okay to overlook those to an extent, but that's too straight.
Yeah, fits and starts for the offense. And I mean, like, we're talking about fits and starts for the offense. They still scored 37 points. We all know it can be better. Now, you mentioned the defense. I think a lot of people might push back on you. What do you mean the defense played well to give up 34 points? Kind of similar conversation to the offense, quite frankly. Down and down out basis, Oregon was pretty dang good. They were brutal on third down. I mean, 9-19 for Boise State is simply not good enough. And then when you're playing Ashton Genty, I thought like they did a decent job against Ashton Genty, but when you do make a mistake, when you miss a tackle or you fit a run play bad, Ashton Genty's not one of those guys that just beats you for 12 yards. He's going to beat you for 70 and a touchdown. And we saw that tonight, 15 minutes ago. I want to start with the defensive line, because that was our biggest question heading into this Oregon program. And if there was one, at least in my opinion, positive takeaway, if you will, throughout the first 2 games, this Oregon defensive line's got difference makers. Like, Derek Harmon is the guy that we thought he was in the transfer portal. Jordan Burch is playing well. Tatum Tuioti has seemingly take that step. Mateo Yu's playing well. I think the defensive line is being quite disruptive. I thought the linebacker play was far too inconsistent today.
And you saw some good moments, obviously. I mean, Jeff Boston making good plays,
Yep.
making some really good plays. Jackson, I thought, played really good for when he was
Devin Jackson, I think. Sorry to interrupt you. Bryce Betcher, Devin Jackson, earning more play time, in my opinion. I think they're both playing really good football.
And they deserve it. They're both really good in coverage. They're not missing a lot of tackles. They're flying around in the way I think you want to see. Frankly, the Oregon linebackers fly around a little more. So those guys are playing well. But I think you're right. And at the end of the day, like if your linebackers don't play well on a play against this Oregon or Boise State team, I should say, yeah, they really expose you because you're right. Ashton Genty, I mean, just that combination of the ability to run through arm tackles, ability to break tackles, and then just an acceleration that I don't think many running backs have. It kind of changes those plays when, yeah, you fit the run play poorly. Maybe it goes for 10 yards for a lot of running backs. Obviously, Genty, he'll rip a 70-yard off on you. So, again, they really get exacerbated. But at the end of the day, I think you're starting to see some young linebackers really emerge for this team. Jeff Boss, I thought, did play a pretty good game by and large. I mean, obviously had his moments for sure, but making a couple plays in the past and doing some good things. I don't know. That is the frustrating part. As I look at the game, it's like, well, I thought mostly they played well, but
that is like I would say, all right, like Jeff Bossa played well. He had a couple of good plays, but he also had some plays that gave up big chunk plays and times touchdowns. Again, kind of like we talked about the offense, just be more consistent. The secondary I thought was very good. You look at the numbers for Maddox Maxson, 17 to 40, buck 48, a touchdown. Not a lot terrible. Like there just wasn't a lot of throwing windows. Having Jabbar Muhammad's a game changer. Like he just kind of takes away a half of the football field. And I would like to see Tosh Lupoy get a little bit more creative in terms of, hey, when you have that true cornerback one, and it's rare, there's not that many of these kind of cornerbacks, right? You have Will Johnson in Michigan, Denzel Burke at Ohio State, Benjamin Morrison at Notre Dame, and I probably just put Jabbar Muhammad in that tier one category when you have that kind of cornerback. I'd like to see Oregon maybe get a little bit more aggressive because you know you can do creative things when you trust a cornerback like Jabbar Muhammad to take away the wide receiver one.
You are starting to see some other guys start to play good in that secondary too. I thought they were really playing well from that nickel spot today in a way that I don't think you've seen. Nico Reed was playing pretty good. So again, you're starting to see guys step up. I thought the secondary, I'm kind of with you. That was the unit that I thought really shined for the most part, really consistent, really didn't have any. I mean, they made some throws, and credit to Boise State. Made some catches, like that's going to happen. But I don't think there were a ton of busts. There weren't a ton of issues emanating out of that secondary room. Again, a lot of it, frankly, for the defense, turning the ball over for that offense led to 14 points. And then, yeah, just having a couple fits against a really good running back that were a little bit off, and that obviously led to a 10 yards.
Brandon Johnson, probably the last guy that I would shout out in that Oregon secondary. I thought he's looked good for 2 straight games. Dill, we got a lot to dive into with this Oregon team over the next couple of days. Obviously, Oregon State coming up next weekend. And again, I think there was, and I'll round it out with this take, and I've kind of said this take the last couple of weeks, or at least the last couple of days. There was a lot of hype around this Oregon team. Like they went to the transfer portal. I think they have one of the best. They have a national championship caliber roster. We've said it all offseason. They've underperformed the first 2 weeks. I'm not making excuses because I know Dan Lanning he's talking to the team right now. I know he's pissed off. This is a team that has so many new faces, and you can tell they have new faces. They're not coming together as a team. There's a reason I put Dan Lanning as a top 3 coach in the country for me. I do trust Dan Lanning to get it together. You got a couple more games where you can afford to play like this and probably still win. But if you want to win a national championship, if you want to beat Ohio State in the next couple of weeks, you got to clean it up. Again, we'll get into the film a little bit later this week. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.